Joining us now is the chair of the Conservative Democratic Organisation, David Campbell Bannerman, and former Director of Health for the North West of England, Dr John Ashton. David, I'll come to you first. What did you make of the former Prime Minister's performance yesterday?
I thought he did very well, actually. I was glad to see he did make an impassioned apology on behalf of the government. He attempted to answer the questions, rather. A lot of the previous witnesses seems to be just trying to, blame everyone else apart from themselves. And I think he's handled it very well, and it's good to see. And it's the right way to go. He does have to answer these questions as best as he can and to be held to account.
John Ashton, if I could bring you in, former president of the UK Facility of Public Health and author of Blinded by Corona. Welcome to Talk Today. What did you make of his apology?
Well, I think the thousands of relatives of those who died unnecessarily in the pandemic are giving the measured response, which is that it was a non-apology apology. He clearly done his prep for the first time since he'd left school in making all those apologies, but they sounded hollow. I think the afternoon was interesting because we saw, again rehearsed, but it was a rehearsal of flannel, waffle, bluff and bluster that we know so well. I mean, he really endeavoured to blame the advisors for not putting him in a position to make the decisions, and he demonstrated his own indecisiveness. And he actually admitted that he'd only ever read a couple of SAGE documents. He hadn't actually read the material that was being provided for him.
David, that's the issue, isn't it? I mean, I've sat here for a long time, and I will continue to say it. I think that there are obvious flaws in how he did it. I think that anybody would have floundered, whatever anybody tells me. I have great sympathy with the families of victims. But yesterday you said, and it was calm and considered, but is there... I don't know what people want. I want this inquiry, as I keep saying, to be about how we learn never to find ourselves in that position again. Sure, it might be in hindsight that Boris Johnson just wasn't the right person for that, right? But at the end of the day, it seems to be tittle-tattle. And I mean, John will think differently, but he didn't seemingly throw anybody under the bus as much as others had done. I'm not saying that makes him right. It's just a fact.
No, I think you're right, Jeremy. I mean, the purpose of the inquiry should be about lessons for the future, because as had been touched on yesterday, the government was overwhelmed, as governments were overwhelmed all around the world, in America and, in Europe. And, this was a terrible crisis and on a massive scale. And, that came across. I mean, I don't think what did come across was that, Boris Johnson nearly died himself. I mean, I understand from medical sources that, they were actually at one point arguing which priest to call. They weren't sure. And, it was that close. So everyone suffered from this. It's a terrible episode. But it is important that we do learn the lessons. So be prepared for, God forbid, anything similar in future.
And John, yesterday... Boris Johnson mentioned how he should have twigged about the seriousness of COVID sooner. But I take myself back to that winter 2020. And I know that I myself was screaming at the television because he was going around shaking the hands of COVID patients. How on earth could he not have, to use his word, twigged that this was a serious, serious disease?
Exactly. And this is... all laid out in my book, Blinded by Corona. That week that actually began on the 7th of March when he was at Twickenham, followed rapidly by Cheltenham and Anfield, when, the thing was clearly out of control and he refused to get a grip. I mean, every single thing he did too late, and we wouldn't have needed to have locked down so severely if he'd acted more promptly.
So let's just investigate that, because I remember...
The only thing we got right was really the vaccination
John,
programme.
you're right. I remember. I'm a horse racing fan. We got invited to Cheltenham. It was March... I can tell you the date, the 11th, 2020, and several of us went, no, we're not going. 200,000 people crammed inside Cheltenham. You talked about it in the press. You were vindicated, absolutely. I'm not. I just want to try and get both sides. If you're telling me that the Prime Minister of this country is surrounded by the best in the business, because he's not a medical person, are you telling me that Whitty or Vallance or somebody else said, you need to ban Shelton, you need to ban Anfield, you need to not do this, and he ignored them? Or are we saying that he wasn't given that advice? I absolutely accept he obviously dithered. But why weren't the experts saying, you've got to do this right now, pal?
Exactly, you're right. I mean, what we had here was a perfect storm of a Prime Minister who wasn't up to it and advisors who weren't assertive enough with a Prime Minister who wasn't up to it. I wonder how Winston Churchill would have handled this.
Very interesting. David, you were shaking your head. Talk to me.
Yeah, I think there's a rather political point, John. To be honest, not up to it. He's a very bright man, Boris, and he did, I think, a very good job, as you say, on the vaccines. He led the world on vaccines, and a lot of that was his energy and drive. So let's be fair to him. Well, hang on a minute, because I saw a circular yesterday, the medical circular that was sent out about COVID. It was only 2nd of March, and the first lockdown was the 23rd of March. So the point was, this overwhelmed us very fast indeed. And, so I think it's unfair to go around pointing fingers like this, because a lot of these experts did not know, how big this was. And, the Prime Minister has an awful lot of functions, and it's their job to actually sort of call him to account and say, look, this is...
But he was distracted by his mistress and didn't attend the first meetings
John,
are
you funded by Labour? What?
I mean, this is fact. He was distracted. In February, when it was all brewing very rapidly, he didn't have it on his radar.
Well, it's true to say that he failed to attend 5 COBRA meetings that were set up in response to the pandemic, isn't it, David?
And we have to ask, what was he doing at that time?
Well, come on. I mean, these are cheap shots. You've got Hancock.
No, not cheap shots.
Mine was not a cheap shot. He did not attend 5 COBRA meetings.
Thousands and thousands of lives.
One at a time.
Because he was so narcissistic. Narcissistic.
Feels at COBRA. And, the Prime Minister, funnily enough, has an awful lot to do. And it's the responsibility of Number 10 and his advisors to draw attention to the fact how serious this is. As I just said, this all happened incredibly quickly in March.
Can I jump in, gentlemen? I never thought I'd be a referee. I said it before and I'll say it again. In my opinion, if you're destined for something all your life and within 3 months you've either got to make sure that the economy's screwed or people die. I'm not saying that he got it right or wrong, but other people would have struggled. For me, Boris Johnson's mistakes, David, are that he surrounded himself, primarily Cummins, with people who were not loyal and who did not tell him to his face. I think it's a bit of a cheap shot, though, John. I accept this, a genuine comment. I think the advisors having diaries and stuff, I don't think too highly of those two after what was said. But you're absolutely right. I'm going to say the wrong word then. It was a catastrophe, and it wasn't well managed. But you know what? Hindsight's a great thing. I keep saying it, and I will keep saying it. We need to stop the he said, she said, and make sure we are never in this position again.
My book was written day by day as it happened, and it called everything absolutely right. It wasn't hindsight.
Well, there we go. Well, listen, Campbell, Bannerman, legend, your book. Where can we get the book then, John?
Blinded by Corona.
Lovely.
Gibson Square Press.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much to David Campbell Bannerman.
Are you sending David Campbell Bannerman a free copy?
If he'll send me his address,
I'll be delighted. I'm sure it's very good, John. But
excellent. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you,
guys. I recommend The Plot by Nadine Dorries.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you.
Well, still.